Um, Let me say a quick prayer here. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, Pastor Boatman is in Colorado today doing classes as part of his sabbatical. Since he's gone and he can't defend himself, I thought I would tell a quick story about him. Many of you may know that Pastor Boatman plays golf, and the other day it's my understanding that he decided that he was going to go out later in the day and walk 9 holes. He came back sometime later looking rather tired and exhausted and bedraggled, and Lorraine said, "Richard, what happened?" And he said, as I got on the number 1 tee, a guy joined me and we walked together, and we got to the 4th tee. Suddenly he grabbed his chest, fell over, and died. And he said, after that, it was hit the ball, drag him, hit the ball, drag him. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Doyle Scott. My wife, Star, down over here, and we've attended Oakwood for the last 3 years. We are the parents of 5 grown daughters, and our brood has grown to 11 with the addition of 3 son-in-laws and 3 grandchildren. My daughters number 2, 3, and 4, Lisa, Amanda, and Laura, are here with me today. They are obviously the ones who love me. Number 5 did call me from Cedar Rapids, where she lived. Number 1 has yet to check in. And as they said already, I am 63 years old today. Yes, 63 years old. Thank you. Where else do you get clapped for being alive? But I know, when you look at me, you can't believe that I'm just a day over 62. When I consider what I was going to talk about, then that's always the hardest part when I'm going to give a sermon, is what am I going to talk about? What do I think will interest people? I like to go back to my favorite topics because they interest me. I don't care if they interest you or not. And one of my things is I'm kind of a Bible geek. That is, I like to study the Bible so I can learn as much as I can about not only what is written, but about what the words and the actions might have meant at the time of Jesus. Well, why is that important to me? The example that I typically use is when we interpret the Bible, we tend to interpret them as we understand things today. Words and customs are understood in the way that we've experienced them. So I like to study the customs of society when Jesus was alive. Knowing those helps me to understand the various verses that I'm reading. For example, in the time of Jesus, the custom was that if someone came to your door, said they needed a place to stay, you would allow them to stay in your home, and you would also feed them. Now, my classic example of wording is about my grandfather, Scott, who was born in 1876 and in his later years became a minister in the Evangelical United Brethren Church. In fact, I believe when we talk about the United Methodist Church, that's taken from United and Evangelical United Brethren when they came together with the Methodists. Now, I have some letters that my grandfather wrote. Given the time he lived, I might find someone who wrote him saying that he was quite the gay fellow. Of course, in that time it meant something different than what we might infer that it means today. So, when we read about things in the Bible, we need to put it in context of the time. That's why I call myself a geek. Those are the types of things I'm trying to learn so that I can better understand what's in the Bible. Now, I will suspect that many of you know that in 2015, a group of us, I think it was, went to, right? 16. Thank you. In 2016, I've been okay. Went from this church, took a trip to Israel and Egypt. I'm sure we all had reasons to go, but my geeky reason for going was that I wanted to see the places that I've long read about to better understand what those places really look like, so that I have a picture in my mind now as I read my Bible. So today I'm going to share some of those pictures with you in the hopes that you can better understand what places really look like and some of the customs people were following when you see stories in the Bible. Yes, I'm showing vacation pictures today. Okay, the first disclaimer. When we arrived in Israel, we quickly found out that most of the places we we're going to visit were believed to be where things happened, but there was no guarantee it was the correct place. For example, it wasn't until over 400 years after Christ died that a number of different sites were designated as the sites where specific things occurred. That would be like someone wanting to know where a particular person who was fighting in the French and Iroquois War in the 1640s had died. We can guess where it was, and that can be an educated guess, but there's no guarantee. So as Pastor Richard and I would discuss the places that we'd seen, we would also often refer to them as sacred vicinities. I'm sure some were the right places, others probably were not, but that doesn't change what's in the Bible or anything that we study. Today I'm going to try to take you chronologically partway through the life of Christ to show you where they believe some things happen and to give you a short explanation of what might have been going on. Slide 2, there we go. The first thing is that, not surprisingly, every place that we went to had a church sitting on top of it. Now, in my mind, it would be just an open field, and this is with a plaque, and that's where it happened. There's a church on every one we went to. And it's going to be a little hard to see, but if my pointer, if I can find the spot, yes. Right there, there's people that are actually worshiping in the church, and this is the Church of the Annunciation. Church service is on. Next slide, please. But this is where the Annunciation took place, or they believe it is. It's where Gabriel told Mary that she was going to have a baby. Now, in my mind, it had been in a house. We're not able to tell really anything as we look at this one. Next slide. Now, this, at Christmas, we tend to westernize what we read and modernize what we read in the Bible, including the birth of Christ at Christmas. At least most youngsters, and probably adults, think of him being born in a barn like you might see in the countryside of Iowa. Now, looking at this picture, which is a painting, you can see the artist believed he was born in a cave. If that is the case, this is probably the basement of a house. Now, how this would have worked is that, remember that the custom is, if someone comes to your house and needs a place to stay, you give them a place to stay. What they would do is, in some of the houses, they would put the house literally over a cave, and the cave would act as a basement. Then, at night, they could move some of the livestock from outside into the cave. And then they could put a gate up or something so that they would be held there. Also, in those caves, they would put things so that if travelers came to their house, they would have a place to stay. So they would go down and they would sleep with the livestock at night. I'm not sure if that would encourage people to come back or not. Now, next slide. There we go. Well, that's a painting. This place you see right here now is what's actually believed to be the actual spot where Jesus was born. Now, when I saw it, honest to me, it looks like a fireplace. You literally had to get down on your hands and knees and crawl a little forward to see inside. Next slide. And if you can see that spot right there, there's a star. That's where they believe Jesus was actually born. Now, the crowds are such that what you do is you get down, you crawl in, you're there for 5 seconds or less, and then you crawl back out. The reason it's so short is because the lines are so long. If you spend any time in there at all, people are going to be waiting forever in order to get in. Next slide, please. This is a painting of the shepherd's field where they believe the shepherds were when the angels appeared to them after Jesus was born. What is interesting to me is right here shows the cave, and if you can see it, there's actually some sheep back in there, and there's a boy there, I presume a shepherd, that's outside. Again, a geeky thing is at the night, the shepherds would have wanted to herd the sheep into a place like a cave or some kind of container where they would feel safe, because sheep will not sleep if they don't feel safe. So what the shepherd would do is they would herd them into the cave, then the shepherd would lay outside so that nothing could get in to kill or steal the sheep without the shepherd knowing about it, nor could any of the sheep get out of there, again, without the shepherd knowing about it. Go to the next slide, please. Our guide told us that this is where we're standing right here, where the picture's taking is where they call the shepherd's field, where they thought the shepherds were at. But our guide said that this right over here was probably what it would have looked like. where the shepherds were actually at. So you might see some caves back in there, but you notice that there's not many trees or anything like that. Next one, please. Okay, this is a picture of the Jordan River. Now, we remember that that's where Jesus got baptized by John the Baptist. The thing I'd like you to notice is you can walk down there, but the Jordan River is actually not very wide. It doesn't move very fast, and it's pretty doggone dirty. And that would have been, that we do not know for sure where Jesus was baptized, so there's a couple places. In fact, some of our people whose wives remembered to pack their swim trunks were, yes, my wife forgot, but that's another story. And of course, I could have done it, but it's not good if I blame myself. So some of us were actually baptized in that as well, in a different spot, though they don't think that's the actual spot, but then again, who knows? Next slide. The Sea of Galilee. Lots of things happened in the Sea of Galilee, we know, when we study our Bible, including Jesus asked Simon, Andrew, Philip, Nathanael to come join him. In my mind, the sea was the size of one of the Great Lakes. After all, remember they talk about the storms, the high waves, the big blows, and other things. The reality is that you can pretty much stand on any part of the shore of the Sea of Galilee and you can see the shore all the way around the lake. Now, where this picture is taken, I would guess we're a quarter to halfway across the lake right there. So the Sea of Galilee really is not very large. Next one, please. Now, Jesus' first miracle took place in Cana, where he attended a wedding. The host ran out of wine, and his mother told Jesus to turn some water into wine. And this is where they believe that happened. Next one. Okay, this is Capernaum. It's where they believe Jesus began his ministry. It is located right along the Sea of Galilee. Now we know that Luke writes of Jesus speaking in the synagogue there. Some believed he lived with Peter's family, and that this is the spot where they believe the house is. Now, the picture does not show it well, but the house is below what we're seeing right here, so we could actually look down below there and see some of the house. You have to understand that in Israel, the people would decide to locate a town someplace, and then they would build the town in that spot. Then along would come some conquerors, and they would conquer and level the town. Then the conquerors would literally fill in above the town, put dirt and stuff till it was level again, and they'd build another town on top of that. Or I recall in one place they said that they had dug down 7 layers. So there actually were 7 layers of towns that had been built, then destroyed, built and destroyed, and so on and so forth. In this case, you see this part right here, and back here is kind of rounded. There is a synagogue now above Peter's house. Now, we don't know why there's a synagogue. I think it's one of 2 reasons. One is because the Jews, after Jesus died, said, we're going to do this right there, to kind of in your face to Jesus. Or it could also be that some of his followers built a church, which would have been a synagogue on top of that spot. Well, an interesting geeky thing is, why did Jesus go to Capernaum to begin his ministry? Well, our guide told us it was because of caravans. Capernaum was where caravans going from the north to the south and east to the west would meet. They would cross there. And so consequently, Jesus would have set up there to be a preacher. And when he would preach, the people from the caravans would have stopped there. Then they would hear him preach, and then they would take what he said to the places that they were going and the stops that they made along the way. So that's how he spread the word. It was kind of the internet of his day, I guess. Well, the next slide is, this is the Beatitudes where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It is less than a half mile from Capernaum. Now, some say that there may have been 10,000 people there. Oh, come on. How can a guy give a sermon to 10,000 people? I mean, how could they hear him? Reality is that they've gone in and they have done studies of that spot. And they believe that not only could you give a sermon to 10, but to 20 and maybe as many as 30,000 people with a person speaking at 79 decibels, that they could be heard by that many people within there if each person was in an area of 2, I can't remember, meters is the amount of space that they take up. Okay, geeky stuff. Next one, please. Okay, you remember the story of Zacchaeus? Right here you can see the road. This is actually Jericho, and Zacchaeus lived in Jericho. You remember that they heard that Jesus is coming to town. So the people have come out. They're all excited to see him. And what would they have done? They would have lined the road. Probably not this one, and it probably didn't look like that, but that's okay. And Zacchaeus, being a short guy, I'm assuming that they were several people deep, didn't think he could see Jesus. So what does he do? He climbs up in, and this is a sycamore tree, I suppose, in order to see Jesus. Then we know Jesus says, well, I'm coming to your house, and we go on from there. Next slide, please. This is Tabgha, where Jesus multiplied the fish and loaves to feed 5,000 people. No, this is the rock right here, and there probably wasn't a table over it at the time. But if you look in front of it, you can see the fishes and the loaves are actually in the floor there that they put there when they built the temple there. Next slide. Okay, Jesus spoke at the synagogue at Nazareth. One of the stories, they said that he said some things about implying that he was the Messiah, and that really ticked off the people that were there. In fact, it made them so mad that they decided they were going to take him out to the edge of town and throw him off the cliff. But the Bible tells us that when they got out there, he just walks back through them. Well, this is what I've believed now as a result of being there. First off, there's more of a cliff there in other places, but that's not much of a cliff to throw him off of. That's about 2 miles from the town. So, to my thinking, what happened was he says some stuff, they get mad at him, they're herding him out towards there, and they've got about a half an hour to talk. And in the process of talking as he goes there, they start to understand what he's saying, and by the time they get out there, we don't want to do this, and he just turns around and walks back through them. Next slide. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to focus on Jerusalem, and most of it's going to be on his last days for the rest of the ones that we've got. You may remember the stories of Jesus teaching and that he often taught in Jerusalem. Chances are he would have gone to the teaching steps or the rabbi steps near the temple. So this is back here is part of where they would have had the temple in Jerusalem. These were actually built so that people could teach. Now our guide is right here, and you can see that he's actually standing on a little area. So all those 2,000, 3,000 years ago when they built that temple, they built it so that, my pointer wouldn't work out, press the right button, so that you could do things like this. The interesting part is these look like stairs, but they're actually seats. And the seats were built in different styles depending on the different type of people who might end up sitting on those. Next slide. This is a slide that shows right there is the walls of Jericho. Now Jesus would have come into, the walls of Jerusalem. Jesus would have come into Jerusalem, of course, from different spots, and this is just one of the spots. What I want you to really notice here, though, is that it's a hilly area. And the reason it's a hilly area is that when they would have built Jerusalem, they would have built it as a fort initially as we go back to David, which is why he built the city of David as a fort. They would have put it on a hill because when the invaders come, that meant they would have had to go up the hill. They wouldn't have had as good a shot towards the people that are up there, and the people up above on the walls would have had a better shot at shooting down at them. Now, you notice that's okay, that outside of there was a bunch of homes and stuff, and typically that would be normal, that they would build homes inside, they would build homes outside, and then when they were attacked, the people outside would move in, they would be protected there, and they could also help fight from the inside. Okay, now go to the next one. This is the Garden of Gethsemane, or what they believe it is. On the night when Jesus was betrayed, we remember that he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is located on the Mount of Olives. Okay, the Mountain of Olives. That's what it is. Now, this is a picture that shows part of that garden, or what they believe it was. If you can see right there, that tree is 2,000 years old. That's a 2,000-year-old olive tree. If an olive tree is cared for, they can live almost forever. So that tree right there may well have been there at the time when Jesus was praying on there and the night he was arrested. The other interesting part is that you can't see it from here, but over in this area, there's another olive tree. That one's 3,000 years old. So 1,000 years before Christ, that tree was there. I want you to notice the garden really isn't very large. Okay, the next one. Here we can see Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. So as Jesus was praying that night, he would have seen Jerusalem, but at other times when he would have come into Jerusalem from this direction, this is what he would have seen. He would have seen the walls right down there, and if you see that right there, what that is that is known as the Dome of the Rock. Now, the Dome of the Rock is the spot where Muslims believe, and the Dome of the Rock is what the Muslims have built. They believe that that's where the Prophet Muhammad started his journey to heaven. It's also sacred to the Jews because they believe it's the site where Abraham attempted to sacrifice his son Isaac. And the first two temples that were built, the first one was built and then destroyed, and then the second one was built, later destroyed, were built on the same spot or the same general location as the Dome of the Rock. Now, when Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, he would have seen the temple in that location, and of course not the Dome of the Rock. Below the Dome of the Rock, as I said, you can see the walls of Jerusalem, which had also been there at the time of Jesus' death, and in fact, he would have walked through the gates in those walls. Now, below that is the Kidron Valley. So this is what you've got. You've got where the Garden of Gethsemane is here. When they arrest Jesus, or anytime he went to Jerusalem, he would have gone down into the Kidron Valley and then would have gone back up to get into the gates of Jerusalem. Next slide, please. Wanted to show you a quick map, which you're not going to be able to see much here, I guess. I want to make sure I get this right. If you can see, there's some ones right here that are a little bit lighter. That's actually the city of David. Those are the original walls. When David built the city, that's where they put those. Out here you can see some that are a little bit darker. These are walls that were built subsequently. This would be the stronghold, and I can't remember what the name of that was. It's the one that had the 4 towers that went high. Do you remember what that was, anybody? Antonio Fortress. Bless you, Brian. Thank you. So other walls. Here's what you could see right here is the Garden of Gethsemane. So you can see that it's really not very far, probably a quarter mile to half a mile from there down into the temple. When Jesus is arrested, they're going to take him to the house of Annas, which is where he's going to meet with some of the Sanhedrin, and they're going to decide what to charge him with. And then from there, they're going to take him to the house of Caiaphas. Caiaphas, of course, was the leader of the Sanhedrin. Annas was, I believe, his son-in-law. Okay, go ahead, next slide, please. This is the road that they think Jesus might have walked down as he went from Annas' house to Caiaphas' house. Next one. Okay, this is where they imprisoned Jesus in Caiaphas' house. I didn't remember that. When we first went there, I had to go home and get my Bible out, but that's what happened. Now, what we're doing is we're looking here. That's a hole in the floor. So we're actually looking down there. And down here is a dungeon. So what they would have done is when they decided that they're going to arrest Jesus, they would have tied him with a rope, and then they would have lowered him down into the dungeon. We actually went down to the dungeon. There was no way in and out except by rope or something such thing, but now they've made it so that you can walk down in there, so we had a little church service while we were down there. Next slide, please. Now, there is an official site where they think Christ was crucified and buried, and we visited both of those. They're both in a very large church because they put churches over everything. Where Golgotha was, is you walk up some stairs, you crawl underneath the fireplace, and then you can reach down and you can touch the stone where they think that he might have been crucified. Where he's actually buried, the only way I can describe it is there's a big box. It's about a 2-story high building inside the church, and you walk in there and there's a slab, and you've got a couple places that you can stand in order to be there. Again, on both of those, you get no time to spend in there. So we got to go to another place, which is called the Garden Tomb, which is what you're looking at here. And this is another place that some believe where Jesus was actually crucified and buried. Right here and right here, remember that Golgotha means skull. They say that this here, and you can't see it real well in the picture, but that looks like a skull. Therefore, they believe that that's where he was actually crucified. And if that's the case, then he was crucified up in this area. Now, again, in my mind, where he was crucified, there was a huge cliff in front of him. People were all down below and things like that. Reality, if this is the case, is it's really not that high. They did want it to be high enough that people could see it, the Romans did, so that it would be a deterrent to others. So that may be where it was. Next slide, please. In the garden tomb, they also believe that this is where Jesus was taken after he was crucified. And you can see the door to the tomb right there with somebody going into it. So this, they believe, is where he was taken after he was killed. Right here is a channel. So this at least tells you what it looks like. The channel is where the round stone would have been. So the round stone is in here. You can see there's a rock here that stops from going back any further, and they would have rolled it over the covering right there to the door. Now you remember that when Jesus is placed in there, they actually sealed it. Now that doesn't mean that they glued it or whatever. They put a seal on there so they would know if anybody had gone in, and then they put guards there. Next slide, please. Inside is a diagram of what the tomb looks like. When you walk in the door, which is right about there, there's a main room, and then there's another room off of that, and there are two tables. A table on this side and a table on that side, and that's where they would have placed the bodies. The spot in between, I'm sure, so they can get the bodies in there, and so people, I suppose, if they want to go in and do something to the bodies, can do that. Next slide, please. So now we're actually inside the tomb. Now, whether or not this is the real one makes no difference. This would have been the type of place that they would have taken Jesus. Well, I guess it would make a difference if it is the real one, but... Okay, if you look here, you can see that there's a place there where they would have placed a piece of stone, a big thing, so that it would become a table. It's gone. And right here you notice that that's got a little opening underneath the table. That's where it gets interesting, because what they would do in the tomb is they would take the body and they would lay it on a slab like that on that table, and then they'd let it decompose. When it had decomposed to whatever point that they wanted it to be, they would take the body off of the slab of the rock and they would put it underneath there. And then they would lay another body on top of that. Same thing happens. Leave it there till it decomposes, put it underneath there, and then you continue to do that with bodies until it got full enough. Next slide, please. Then they would transfer them to boxes that look like that. So those boxes are large enough that your biggest bone would fit in there so they can make all the bones do it. That is actually some graves from around 300 AD they had just opened up. So they laid on the slab, I'm assuming if you've got enough money, then they would transfer it to that. Next slide, please. This is the opposite side, which doesn't show up very well, but it's got the same type of thing. So within that tomb, there's actually two places where you could lay bodies. Next slide, please. Final one here is the chapel of the primacy, where Jesus met with Peter, and 3 times he said, "Do you love me?" Remember, Peter says, "Yes, I love you. Yes, I love you." And that was his way of forgiving Peter for having denied him the 3 times. Well, when we started, I said my goal was for you to gain a better idea of what things might have looked like and how things might have been done in the time of Jesus. I hope that gives you a better picture of what things are like there, what the Bible is describing, and also some of the traditions now which may make some of the things you read make a little more sense. Let's close in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the day, for the chance to study your word and the chance to learn about who you are and who your people are. We thank you for sending your Son, for the many blessings that you give us. We'd ask that you would help clear our minds to help us know more about who you are and what you would have us be and become. Lord, we'd also pray for Pastor Richard while he's on his trip. We'd ask that you would bless him as he learns more about you and as he seeks to serve you better. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let's rise for a benediction.